Ready in health tech. We all know the headlines. Raising funds is harder than it used to be for digital health founders. The challenges are unique, longer timelines for returns, investors who are interested but lack deep health experience, and the pressure to compete with B2B SaaS metrics. So today, Ian Gamble on the platform partnerships team at Stripe, am joined by a number of different panelists who will talk to you about not just the tactics, but how to sort of build the story around raising, right? From the first crucial decisions that you'll be making about if you should raise, to how to get ready, and what to do when you're actually in the trenches. So panelists, if this is your first time answering a question, please introduce yourself and let us know what your experience is within health tech so our attendees can get to know you a little bit better. All right, with that, let's start with the if you should raise. So there's an implicit assumption that all founders can and should pursue venture funding. But the traditional venture model was not designed for digital health, and health founders have unique challenges with venture. Panelists, how do you think about who is a good fit for VC funding? Maybe Nitesh is a VC
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Nitesh, partner and managing director at Serenexus Ventures. We're a venture studio. My experience spans both advisory, working with early stage companies to help them get raised ready, as well as on the investor side, investing in companies within that sector. So looking forward to this exciting discussion today. In terms of Ian's first comment there around getting ready to think about whether you should raise funds. I think what Ian highlighted is correct. When we think about fundraising specifically for digital health, it's easy to fall into that trap and think of digital health companies as tech companies. And with all the hype that we often see around tech companies in terms of the check sizes, the stage at which they're able to raise cocktail napkin raises, et cetera, it's easy to think the same might apply on the digital health side, but that usually doesn't tend to be the case. VCs that focus on tech tend to not have the right level of expertise in healthcare. So helping explain what the problem is that you're trying to solve and what the impact is can be challenging. Conversely, on the other end of the spectrum, VCs such as Rock Health that focus on health and digital health specifically may be so deep, they're going to ask questions that are far more in depth than perhaps you're ready to answer at the early stage. So that's where I think bringing it back to when you're thinking about fundraising, identify who would be a good partner for you, what exactly do you need the funding for, and what's the best way to tell that story. I'll pause here and let some of the other panelists add as well. But if you have any questions or specific comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we're happy to address those as well.
Yes, this is a good point. The Q&A is open, so feel free to drop questions in and I'll try and weave them into the rest of the discussion.
I'll be happy to jump in. So, hi, nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Ravid. I recently sold my startup, iFocus Health, but I do have 15 years in experience in digital health. So, in both startups and larger organizations, so quite a varied experience, mostly in product. And I will speak from the position of a founder of a startup. One of the things that we've seen very often is, would you be able, is your market big enough? VCs wants to see tens of billions of revenue, and they want to have 10x within 5 to 7 years. This is usually, and Tish, correct me if you feel differently, but this is what they're used to. And if your product is not addressing a big enough market, or the revenue that you will be able to bring is not in the billions, or you won't be able to get there fast enough, then maybe VC is not the right fit for you. And you should either think of bootstrap or any other funding, especially in the very early phases when you're still not sure. You have always the opportunity to pivot or expand, which happens in various startups, and it's a very common thing, and it happened to us as well to expand our market. But at the very beginning, look at angels, look at grants, look at advisors that are willing to put money and not only advice. There are other angles or other options, and I highly recommend exploring all of them.
You, thank you for that. You mentioned something in there that got me thinking about the product. So when would you consider the product or the ideal idea at a place where you can take it to VCs? Is it something that you already have, it's pre-revenue, or maybe you've gotten some paying customers? When do you start to think about the sort of maturity of the product before you actually start considering taking it to the market?
I can jump in here as
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Ravi. Oh, I was just going to add, I think that when we think about simply engaging VCs or potential funders in conversations, the sooner the better. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be ready. Don't burn the relationships you have, but it's always a good idea to engage them early, to tell them what problem you're trying to solve and get an understanding for, is that an area of focus for them? Would that be a good fit? And if so, what would they need to see in terms of progress and milestones to potentially fund you? I think the sooner you have those conversations, the better, because the answer may vary. Someone may write you a check based on an idea on a cocktail napkin. Someone else may need actual data from a pilot that you've done, and you won't know until you actually talk to those investors and see what it is that they are looking for. Go ahead, Ravi.
And I think the current financial environment is very different than the one we saw 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, especially during COVID, that things were very different. VCs expect to see revenue, even in a seed funding. And if they don't understand digital health, they don't understand that the revenue is not there yet, usually. Digital health, as well as any other product in the healthcare environment, you need validation, you need to build trust, you need to understand reimbursement, you need to understand regulation. There are so many avenues that you need to think of that does not exist with, I don't know, cybersecurity or SaaS or marketing or whatever market that you're thinking of. And the road to get into revenue is much, much longer. And healthcare systems are so not early adopters, to say the least. So if you are even thinking of raising money from VCs, start building the relationship early, but don't expect the checks early.
I think that's a great point. I guess when I think
Sorry, is it just me or is your audio a little off?
Yeah,
Repeat
I
that, we
think
can't
it's
hear you.
cutting off.
Yeah, we're not hearing you well.
how about now? Switch to a different microphone. Okay.
Yes, that works. So this is your non-fancy microphone?
This is the non-fancy microphone. Yeah, so hi everybody, Arvita Tripathi, 3x0 to 1, as a founding team member, helping companies go Series A, Series B at various points in my career. Let's see. So yes, I think that we need, it's often good to like take a step back and think about not just what are you trying to do with this next bit of money that you're raising, but what are the expectations that are going to be put upon you based on that money you're going to be raising. I find a lot of people ask the first question, but it's that second question that's really going to like tell you whether or not this is something that you're going to be able to be successful with, right? So like when you're pre-seed, 5-10 years ago, it used to be, can you? Would be the kind of the question that you're trying to answer in your pre-seed outcome, right? But now it's more of like a should you, like, do you have that special insight? Are you going to be able to have a wedge that like lets this thing blow up? And so same with like seed, you know, it shifted from let's explore things to like having actual outcomes, right? And so having that, being able to ask that question, like, what am I signing up for? What is the outcome that my funders are expecting by taking this money? And then also applying a filter of like, how patient are these folks that I'm getting the money from? Because like to Nitesh and Ravid's point, like, do they understand it's a longer validation cycle? Do they understand that there's higher compliance costs that are going to probably eat into margins a little bit? Do they understand that there's going to be fewer early buyers, but then as you build steam, pick up momentum, things will accrete. So like those are the two big lenses that I look at things through.
Got it. Thank you. Maybe that's a good transition to the next phase, right? So the founder in our audience has done that soul searching, and they've decided that yes, the venture path does make sense for my business. Now they actually have to get raise ready. So obviously that's not just a pitch deck. There are a lot of different components to that, and especially in the digital health space. So maybe I'll pivot this over to you, Aravinda, with your background. So what does it mean to get raise ready from a legal and corporate hygiene perspective?
And I'm excited to be here. My name is Aravinda Seshadri. I am the founder of Venturous Counsel, a uniquely mission-driven law firm dedicated to working with diverse and mission-driven in startups and investors. And so, I've seen a lot of investors, as has our team, during our career. And we do have quite a few companies in health tech and digital health space. I think on the corporate side, there are some basics. You want to have an entity. You can have great ideas and you can have really friendly founders, but if there's nothing on paper, that's a risk. And it's not too hard to create a company that looks pretty solid. Actually, for clean incorporations, I recommend a platform called Clerky. It was created by lawyers. The documents are totally solid. I've taken companies formed on Clerky through multiple rounds of financings and acquisitions with no issues.
Not Stripe
And
Atlas?
look, Stripe is fine, but actually Clerky has a few extra bells and whistles, and it has some functionality that we're able to leverage even after the incorporation process. So Stripe is fine for what it is, but for paying a teeny bit more, you actually get more functionality to be able to use these forms, and even have, I've trained our team on how to use their tools on equity administration, again, to just reduce the cost for our clients. Either of those I think are fine. And the key is, still, it is the case that most investors expect an entity to be a C Corp, a corporation based in Delaware. And C just means that it's a normal corporation and it's not done anything special with the tax, with IRS, to elect to be taxed in a different way. And that the founders have most of the shares in the company, that you've reserved some amount to be issued to advisors, consultants, and eventually employees once you actually have the money to hire employees, and that the intellectual property that is being created has been assigned to the company. And those are just, pretty straightforward, not painful to do, but you'd be shocked at how many companies have not done these basic things. And then when we go to paper it, people actually are no longer in alignment. So when you have that alignment, strike while the iron is hot. And when you have that alignment, get people to sign stuff. Once they sign stuff, we can amend, we can adjust. But if people haven't signed anything, it's a real risk, because unless they've signed something assigning intellectual property to the company, you do not own that IP. And there's always a risk that someone could come and like Winklevi the whole situation and claim that they, were the idea. And that risk is one that investors will not, they're not in the market of dealing with that kind of risk. They're okay dealing with like, okay, failure to reach product market fit or failure to scale in the proper way. But this is a basic risk that is just going to invalidate you from getting investment if you don't do that quickly. The other small thing I'm going to plug is that have many opinions about this tax bill that was passed on July 4th. I'm not going to share all of them, but there was one thing that was actually beneficial for startups, which is an expansion of an existing tax credit called Qualified Small Business Stock, QSBS. And what that does is it allows startups to sell shares. It used to be you had to hold for 5 years. Now it kind of phases in at 3 years and you get the maximum at 5 years. At no federal taxes, up to now it's $15 million. So it's like a significant tax advantage, but you have to hold the shares for a longer period of time. So if you had a company that was in stealth and they waited for 2 years and then they formed the company and then they sold in 3 years or they sold in 2.5 years, you might be kicking yourself for not having formed the entity a little bit sooner. So just a few sort of PSA things I wanted to throw in there. They're more generic, but when it comes to health tech companies, these are table stakes. You can't, it's really hard to go out there, even if you have an amazing product, maybe even especially if you have really great technology and you don't have the foundation done.
And thank you for that. And I'd actually like to pass it over to Nitesh to get your perspective on this as an actual investor in this space. Are these all things that, can you verify these are all things that you are a part of your due diligence process?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I think what Aravinda listed out was for you as a company, make sure you check all the items on your list for, are you ready to get in front of investors and have a serious conversation that can actually advance forward, with the caveat that, as Ravi highlighted, that first conversation is likely not going to translate into a check, but at least if you have those conversations and you've done everything on your side, the onus is on the investor. So that can help move the process forward. It also shows them that you've done your homework and you're ready. The other thing I would add here is, in terms of doing the homework, is also doing the homework on who are your potential investors. So sort of two categories I would want to think about is, what type of VC should I engage? And the other is, what is the check size, or at what stage are they typically funding companies? This is not an exhaustive list, but at least for digital health, we can think of digital health or healthcare focused VCs such as Rock Health, as I mentioned earlier, or Arch Ventures or Flagship out of Boston, et cetera. They are going to be very healthcare focused. You want to have conversations with them to understand, what are they tracking? What do they want to see today, 6 months from now, 2 years from now? And are you going to be on the path to make that happen? Because no matter what you do, 2 years from now, you're going to need to answer those questions that these VCs are asking you today. On the other side, if you focus on tech VCs, A16Z, Anderson Horowitz, any of the ones out of the Bay, they may have healthcare divisions and they may be more flexible, but they may not necessarily have the network or the connections which might be valuable to you. The third could be within the healthcare space, actually, strategic corporate VCs. Pharma companies have them, med device companies have them, health systems have them, payers have them. If you're solving a problem that directly impacts the customer base of any of these 4 major stakeholders, go talk to them. They might be willing to fund you. They might even be your customer. You get a customer and you get funding. So I would say that's the other thing to think about. Lay out the VC landscape, maybe some kind of a vision board, and then try to identify where exactly do you fit, what's going to be your best shot at telling a good story. So that would probably be the only thing I would add in terms of getting ready before you have those conversations.
I love that idea of the vision board. I kind of talk about it as a buyer's journey, because I think it is another sales process, right? And so, like, if you can apply your go-to-market, cap as towards like the investing process, and treat it like, okay, what is my buyer's journey? Who is my ICP? What is an ECP versus my ICP? And then what are those triggers, and how do I line up my positioning and my messaging to address it? Like, that's another frame that I find like can help people really get more into the mindset.
And I will add here just one sentence, Ian. Design partners, think of them. If you're coming from tech world, this term is very familiar for you. They will be a customer and might help you with the funding and will give you very, very honest feedback. So in the very early stages, if you can find a good design partner, that can be gold for the company.
On that, one of the folks that I'm working with, they found their design partners through an accelerator that they went through. And so if you're struggling to get the connections at the large strategics, consider looking around at the accelerators in your space and see if there's that avenue for matching and resources there.
And as someone who have been in an accelerator program, there are specialty accelerator. You should definitely take them over any general accelerator if you can. Their network is just unbeatable.
So some of the things I was hearing there made me think of, right, when you start to fundraise, I always think of the narrative and sort of the vision of the business or of the startup or the idea to be extremely important. I'm curious this group's take on how important is the actual having a really solid multi-year vision for the product and for the organization, and how do you take that vision and tailor it as a part of your narrative to go out and fundraise?
So from my perspective, working with pre-seed companies at accelerators, we care about the long-term vision and that aspiration. But more important, we understand that there's probably going to be at least a pivot, if not a couple, in that life cycle of the company. And so we're looking really to see how well they understand the problem, and are they super passionate about it, and do they have the right like founder problem fit for it. Like, do we think that this is something they're gonna throw their hands up after like 9 months, a year, and be like, next problem, let me try something else? Or do we think that they're going to be persistent and show that grit and really try and figure out what will make it work?
And at least from my experience here, and that goes back to what I said earlier, you definitely have to show a much bigger vision, because if you want to tap into hundreds of billions of dollars market, you cannot just tackle one very small pain point or problem and solve it. And vision is opening doors and markets and revenue streams. And once you are finding one problem to solve, you will see the community that you are solving for always have more for you. So be open for feedback and for an open conversation with your customers, mostly providers, at least in my case, and see where they have more problems that your solution can solve to expand your market.
One thing I would want to add here, I think, Ian, to your point, having a vision is certainly table stakes, right? And if you don't have a good vision, you're not going to be able to tell a good story and convince anyone else that this is worth pursuing. That said, one of the things that I do see often with new founders falling into the trap of kind of falling in love with their own vision. Hey, I think this is going to do this, and 5 years from now, we're going to be this big company and everyone comes to us. I think the vision's a good starting point, but then start to lay out, what would it take to realize this vision? What are some of the key things that need to happen? What would I need to do? What would my company need to do to achieve those things? And if you put that on a timeline, when is that likely? That sort of gets you to that detailed 2 to 5 year plan, which would also line up with a VC's return horizon. So yes, start with the vision, but then really build it out and talk about what you're going to achieve by when, and what would it take for you to get there, and then make that happen. Certainly, if you can't, certainly you can discuss pivots, etc. But I think vision alone isn't enough. It's what you do with that and how you lay it out that matters.
So sort of connecting a couple of ideas that we've discussed so far, right? Natasha, you were mentioning that it's better to try and start having conversations with VCs. So what are some ways that you can come to a VC and have maybe an informal conversation, maybe try and get some feedback on the direction that you're going in that will make sure that the VC feels like they're getting value out of it? Are there any sort of boxes that you should think about checking as a founder when you're trying to have those introductory, more informal conversations before you actually get to the place where you're more explicitly asking for money?
That's a great question. And I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer. I've certainly spoken to some of the VCs that I'm connected with on behalf of founders that I was speaking with, simply to say, hey, I'm talking to this company. This is the field they're in. Here's the history of this field. Would you be open to having a conversation with them just to help them think through how their product is going to fit into the market? Some of them have been open to that. Others have said yes, and then you just don't hear back. So certainly expect that. I think to the points that Ravid and Arvita mentioned earlier, just start networking, going to any events where you know VCs are going to be there, and you can have a conversation during a happy hour that's just briefly, here's a problem I'm solving. Would you be interested in following up just so we can get your thoughts? It's a numbers game. The more of those you have, the more likely you are to get in front of someone. I do agree in that first conversation, you may not necessarily be actually providing value to the other person. So you're kind of counting on them to generously give you their time. But there are plenty of VCs who recognize that this is a relationship, business and industry. They're happy to give the founders a 15-minute, 30-minute call, because you never know, you might see the same founder 2 years from now with their next company. So I would say, don't worry as much about, am I going to be wasting the other person's time? If that's the case, they'll just tell you so, and they won't talk to you, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
And I will remind you all that even though you are the founders and you have the company, at least probably most of the people who joined this webinar, the VCs needs your business. They will not exist without your companies. They're looking to someone to invest in. They're looking for the best, of course, but this is a very mutually beneficial connection, and they want you as much as you want them if you have a good solution. And you have to, once you build this relation, even if you, as I said earlier, not getting the check on the spot, which is probably what will happen, nurture this connection. I know that we have done either quarterly or monthly VCs updates and investors updates on what's going on with the company, how are you advancing, what challenges are you facing, what achievement did you get? And when they are part of the ongoing conversation, and they are feeling engaged into your company, there might be, they know exactly what is the right time for them to get into your and invest in your company. You might not always know that. But once you're keeping them always connected and always informed, this can be an opening the conversation over and over again after the initial connection.
Aravinda, did you have, no, you just came
I
off
was just
mute.
gonna say that, like, actually, I love this idea of kind of reaching out to investors that maybe they're not your initial investors, but you establish the relationship. It's a long game. You impress them. They're not the right person, but they introduce you to other people. And so thinking of it as kind of like a retirement plan for the company, that you're like building it now with these little pieces and touches and these interactions. But it's very hard to make space for that for the average founder that is nose to the grindstone. So you have to really prioritize that in your schedule and in your priorities, because it's this area of like urgent, important but not urgent work that is so foundational to ensuring that the company actually gets a good exit and gets good investment along the way and has good advocates and is selling shares at a good price and not diluting the founders too much. Like, all of these things are served by this process of courting investors. And also at the same time, it's so hard because it's you're doing all these other things, you have so limited time. So if there's a way to like pick events where you're actually interested anyway, and you want to listen to the panelists anyway, and then just socialize afterwards. Come with other founders, make it a social event. You guys need that too. You probably don't have enough of that in your lives as well. So finding ways to make this work for you, but really not deprioritizing it, and understanding that these small investments over time serve such a outsized amount of the value at the end. And those founders who ignore this part, they have an amazing product, they have traction, but they run out of runway and they have a fire sale, and it's tragic. So I don't want that for any of the founders attending this.
Maybe one just piece to add to Arminda's point there. Yes, there may not always be a lot of time, but the good thing is there are so many healthcare conferences every other month. LSX, LSI, Bio, JP Morgan may be a little too expensive, but you go to one of these conferences, spend 2 days. At one of my last conferences, I had 30 back-to-back meetings over 2 days. That's just one chunk, 2 days of your time, and you can potentially have an interaction with 30 different VCs or funders or potential collaborators. And then it's just about following up. And you don't personally have to do that. You can have your team members support you there. But just finding the right time and location where you can maximize that engagement is definitely something you should have on your list of priorities as you think about raising in the next 6 months to 9 months.
Definitely go guerrilla on this. Like with JPM, like nobody, well, not nobody. So few people get the invites, but there's a pretty like intense happy hour scene. So find the dinners, find the happy hours. Those are free. Get on the lists. Have your favorite law firms. I don't know, favorite law firms. I don't know if that's like an oxymoron, but find the happy hours associated with those law firms and get on those lists. And it's a really great way to network.
And the one thing I need to always remind founders is have your elevator pitch ready. Always, you never know who you're speaking with. Every random person that asks you what you do, give them their elevator pitch because you don't know who they know. I can tell you from our personal anecdote, really anecdote from a personal experience. We spoke with a dentist and he connected us with one of our best advisors. So you never know. Keep always talking about your startup with everyone you meet. You're getting used to it and it makes your pitch better and it makes your networking much wider. So always, always, always speak about your startup.
So on that, one thing I was thinking about this week, I was talking to a friend about like networking and how to make it a little bit less painful. Because sometimes you meet somebody at the cheese board and you're like, okay, well, do I give them my 30 seconds of me droning on about like who I am? Like, okay, so having a pitch ladder was something that they talked about. The little 5-second like. Okay, hi, yeah, I'm Arvita. I solve product and go to market for startups. And then if they're curious, then they can ask me more and then, I can go on a little bit more. And so like having these like tiered levels of your canned pitch, maybe it's pretty obvious to everybody else, but for me that was like very helpful to different ways to think about like how to make it bite-sized for different audiences.
All right, I'm going to pivot to some questions from the chat. We had 2 questions that are fairly similar, so I think that I can kind of combine them together. Question 1 was, what about companies that took a while to find their way and held on through all the learning and now are ready to scale, right? So what the question I think is actually asking is, does the VC community, does the fundraising community view an organization that has taken a while, a startup that's taken a little bit longer, and maybe has gone through a couple of iterations beforehand, maybe done some bootstrapping, right? Is that viewed as differently as something that is brand new and fresh, invented in a Stanford dorm room 6 months ago, right? Is there a material difference in how the community will view those 2 opportunities?
I wouldn't say outright that just because you've taken a little bit longer and had to go through a couple of pivots, that alone would be enough to count you out. There may be some VCs that only want to look at companies that have been around 6 months, maybe for a pre-seed round, et cetera. But most VCs often want to see repeat founders or those who have learned from prior experience. I think in that case, it's just important to highlight where you started, what issues you faced, how you solved those issues, and why this iteration, this pivot sets you up well. If anything, this gives you the opportunity to actually highlight the proof points that give you more confidence this time around. I'm part of a syndicate where we just had yesterday a company come back and pitch, and some of the members in the room were like, "Wait, didn't we just see them like 3-4 months ago?" And sure enough, the answer was yes, they were here. We thought they were too early. We told them, go do these 3 things. And then when you're ready, and here they were 4 months later, that alone was not an issue. I imagine with most other VCs, as long as you can explain what that timeline was and what you learned from it and why you're stronger and better now, I think that will carry a lot more weight. But certainly, happy to see if anyone else has a different opinion or different experience here.
And I will say it goes back to raising your own terms. I know I'm on the founder seat and not on the VC seat, but not every founder is a good fit for every company. And if someone thinks that it took you way too long, maybe they don't understand the business deep enough. Maybe they don't understand why you're doing this for so long. Maybe you don't have the same values from a product perspective. What are your values? What are your product integrity, patient safety? I don't know. There are different things that might be really, really important to you. And someone will come to you and say, well, you didn't get into good connections with enough clinics or with enough providers. That's okay, because my priority was first to get to patients and validate that I am solving a problem for them. So again, different values, and maybe just raising your own terms and find the best fit. And if someone think it took way too long, they're not the good fit for you.
Okay, so let's talk more practically about actually navigating the market in 2025, or I guess, with where we are in the year, maybe let's say 2026 as well. So now that we're ready to engage and we want to talk about what does it look like? What does the sort of state of VC funding look like in 2025, early 2026? And then, I'm going to ask the question about the topic that is on everyone's mind, but AI, right? How is the AI boom impacting digital health? What are you all seeing in the market right now?
Yeah, so in terms of like funding and like round size and whatnot, I'm seeing like some research from Rock Health around, the pre-seed being around the 500K to 1.5 million sort of check size, and then like for seed it being more the 3 to 5 million. One thing that we were talking about was, there's been a bit of a shift into maybe going more the angel route with having more experienced operators writing the checks for like a 2 to 3 million safe, rather than going initially for that seed round. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting shift this year, and I'd expect that to continue into next year.
One thing I will say, especially with the AI and the expectations, if you will have to get FDA approval, the rules and the regulations are constantly changing. This is a very, very new field. And if the investors does not understand that when you predict that it will take you a year, but then regulation are changing and now it will take 2 years, this is the way and this is the nature of the business of such a very, very new technology. I think what you really need to think very strongly about, especially if your product is AI based, is where is your moat and what is your differentiation, and how do you make sure that you will be in the market with a very unique data sets that no one will be able to really get your idea and run with it faster because they have a bigger check or they brought a better team or whatever. And you saw that with the scribers, with the ambient patient transcribers that just became such a bubble right now. And I think the VCs understand that. I don't think they expected this, but now that it bursted, it's kind of a lesson learned there. And you really need to be prepared with regulatory path, especially with AI. It's very different now and it's changing. You need to, again, understand this is a process, and the investor is not getting a check is not a one event, it's a process, and they will have to be there with you hand in hand with all the changes all the time. So it's 2026, but I think it will kind of be there going forward, those very fast changes. And the understanding that the healthcare world at the end of the day is not changing that fast and not changing as rapidly as the AI industry and in the tech fields is changing. And that's a very contradicting perception that VCs have to understand if you are in digital health, and you need to pitch that. You need to work on on your storytelling and differentiate yourself, but still make sure everyone understands the challenges, I will call it this way.
I can jump in here as well. So I think the first question was more around the overall VC landscape. How's that going to change? I know things are still not as open as they were immediately in the not post-COVID, but 21, 22, when there was just so much capital, everyone was just writing checks left and right. We're starting to see a bit more of a signal in terms of one of the key leading indicators is how are those VCs that you're potentially tracking doing in terms of their own fundraise? They need to be able to raise money from LPs before they have the ability to deploy. So once you start seeing news that funds are closing their next fund, there will be capital available. And we're starting to see a little bit more of that. The other interesting sort of mega trend that's emerging right now is some of the larger tech VCs are becoming registered investment advisors. So they're starting to realize that timelines and exits may not be what they used to be in the past. It's not an M&A, it's not an IPO. Secondaries markets might be becoming a thing. So as you see a lot of those pieces move and liquidity become more of an option for many of the VC funds, that's going to give them the impetus to then start sourcing new deals, putting the money out there, because it's about churn for them. The more times you can turn your LP's money, the more likely you are to make a return on it. So that's the first piece. I think it will potentially continue to get better in 2026, but there's still uncertainty in the market, and some of these broader trends would be valuable to see what exactly are the investors themselves worried about, thinking about, and doing to make sure they can continue to build on their own business models. In terms of AI, I think could be thought about in two ways. One, as an enabler. We've highlighted some of the examples here. As you think about preparing yourself, planning for meetings, planning for your product, design boards, etc. There are a lot of AI tools that can really take this idea of running lean to the next level these days. You can vibe code an app in 15 minutes with companies like Lovable. They may not be the final product, but at least if you're thinking about building an MVP or a prototype for that initial meeting, you don't need a dedicated software engineer or designer. So think about how you can use AI in the operations, in the process, in helping you pitch and tell your story better. The other side of it is if you are building an AI product yourself, as Ravid highlighted, AI, just the term AI used to probably be a good thing 30 years from now. Nowadays, particularly within the health space, investors might be turned off if you're just using AI without any justification for what exactly this is going to do that's different than an alternative that may be available to them. Specifically within healthcare, it will be about what kind of data can you capture. I can give one example. There's a company we're looking at right now. They are trying to build an AI-based platform to solve the problem of translation in the healthcare field. Most hospital systems spend 2 to 4 million a year hiring translators to make sure they can serve their communities. And this company is developing a product that can automate that entire component. One of our first questions was, couldn't you just use Google Translate or even any of the AI tools that have hundreds of languages baked into them? And their really good answer was, it's not just about translation at the point of discussion. Whatever is translated needs to flow through these 5 systems in the healthcare, in the health system or the clinic, for that to directly impact patient health. What we're doing is building the pipeline and making sure we're interfacing with each of the touch points. And in the process, we're collecting medical specific data that's going to be our own, that's going to make our models better. That's a good story for AI, not just, hey, translations, AI, I could do that on Lovable tomorrow, but I'm not going to sell a company based on that.
And if I go back to the first part of your question, because I spoke about AI, 2 things that I will probably do, and if I'm building a new company in 2026 and want to get some money, you will hear a lot of discussions about the team. And one thing I've seen repeatedly is investors really like repeat founders. Now, you may not have one, but having even one in your team can probably make your chances to get funding higher. So try and look for one. That would be one thing. The other thing is, and just because we discussed this seed, pre-seed, all the terms have completely changed and shifted. Try to get or secure some kind of a partnership, some kind of a design partner, a pilot, pharma, depends what you're doing. But having someone, the first customer, even if they're not even paying, and pilot can be paid as well, securing this is a door opener, because this is probably the strongest validation you can get. And if you're just building a product and no one's using it, or your traction is very, very low with very small adopters or crowd, that's not a good indication, even for pre-seed. So try to get that, and it goes back to the networking, it goes back to what problem you're solving, but this is probably the best indication that your product have some product market fit.
So on that, I would push a little bit and say that if it's an unpaid pilot, it's really just a proof of concept. It's not actually a pilot. I would strongly urge everybody, when you're thinking about pilots, those should be paid and, have some sort of proof of value. That way, proof of impact. That way you can convert that to a paying customer at the end. Otherwise, it's kind of a research project. With the design partners, love that. But just make sure that, you're designing for the breadth of experience, right? Because let's say you get Abbott as a design partner. Okay, fantastic. Abbott's needs are going to be they're going to be selling into maybe slightly different situations than, say, other smaller med techs, or maybe you're like a QMS vendor and you're selling into Abbott. The Abbott's needs for a QMS are going to be different than, say, a small startup med tech. And so make sure when you're looking at your design partnerships, you're not putting blinders on and just implementing basically custom software or a custom product for your partner. So those 2 slight nuances to what Ravid was saying, but otherwise completely agree. As far as what I would do differently in 26 and beyond, it comes back to the shutdown for me. And I would really think about the regulatory impacts, like right now, the way that it's impacting medical devices and biopharma, relatively minimal, but that runway that they have, that cushion from their user fees is slowly running down. And so, depending upon how long this shutdown lasts, I would really strongly think about, okay, what does regulatory arbitrage look like, right? So, US, is that really the place to go first? Or do I not need to start thinking about going abroad, whether it is to the EU, despite them having, a higher bar on, say, the AI of it all? Or do I need to start thinking about other places? And so right now, I think if the shutdown continues through this month, I'd say you're looking at an extra 3 or 4 months of delay. If it goes into like Q1 of next year, I'm thinking it'll like that's when the funding really starts tightening up and people start dropping out, and that'll end up extending timelines for the US by about 12 to 18 months. And so I would like really seriously think about your regulatory strategy if you're going to be doing a med tech play.
Thank you. I have a question from the chat. So, what is the best way to communicate pricing logic with investors? In this example, this founder has been pricing their solution competitively, but they're in dentistry, and since many of the large VCs are not familiar with dentistry, they raise concerns with their pricing, even though they have traction and paying customers. So, the question really being there, like, how does a founder properly communicate to VCs their monetization pricing strategy and deal with objections if they, receive them from the VC?
That's a great question. I guess one of the first reactions as I was reading that was, is your price too high or too low? My guess is they're assuming you can charge more than you're charging. One of the simplest ways to at least tell the story is benchmark yourself to competitors. And by that, I don't just mean those that have the exact same type of product, just under a different brand, but the alternative options that your customers are using today, to highlight that you're within range. If the investors see that you're potentially providing additional value to your customers and that you may be able to capture that incremental value, it's probably not a bad idea to then follow up, and maybe with the next customer conversation you have, try to see if you can do an incrementally higher price and see how those conversations go. If the conversation goes well, maybe the investor was right and you can charge more moving forward. If it doesn't, that's a data point you can bring back to your investor and say, here's why we're charging what we're charging. I think either way, it's not a bad position. If someone thinks you can charge more, find out. If they think you should charge less, show them here's everyone else and here's what they're charging. So why would I go lower than that? But if there are more details, certainly please add and we can be a bit more specific.
Well, I know we only have a couple minutes left, and I would like to make sure that everyone gets in sort of one last piece of advice for our various attendees. So when you think about, and we'll go around the room here, but when you think about the entire fundraising process, right, deciding whether or not you should raise, selecting whether you should go after traditional VC, or maybe you should pursue grants or debt or corporate VC, right? The example with the AI company, I thought of like Epic would probably be, I don't even know if they have a corporate venture arm, but that would probably be one where there's a natural fit there, right? Going through preparing for your raise, actually going out and searching, talking to VCs, and then doing the actual raise. What is one piece of advice that you'd give a founder who's looking to do this in the next 12 months? What was one piece of advice that you'd give them? Maybe Ravid, do you want to start us off?
I will always go back to have a partner, have a pilot. It goes back to the health economics and the pricing that we were talking. You can try it with them. It gives the product market fit. It validates your solution. It validates your pain point, the gap in the market. I don't think you can really raise money nowadays without really having a customer, no matter how you call it. And again, as I said, the team, they always say that the VCs invest in a team and they don't care about the product. I don't think this is really the case in healthcare. But yeah, try really hard to bring someone that is a repeat founder. It makes life so much easier.
Aravinda, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm going to cheat and give two pieces of advice because you were talking about all of these different ways you can raise funding, grants, all these different. You can actually pursue multiple things at the same time. The reason this panel is very focused on the concept of VC funding is you got to do a little extra stuff. You got to like set things up in a specific way. You got to jump through extra hoops, but you can kind of get in prime shape, like whip the company into shape and do all of these things to be able to receive VC funding, which can open doors and also is generally a lot quicker than the grants or other processes. While still pursuing some of these other ideas. Most of my companies at a certain stage are getting loans. A lot of them are eligible for grants in a way that like your average SaaS company is not. So kind of that's one piece of advice. And the other is, we talked about it a little bit during this conversation, but the concept of having support systems and community, whether that's specialists that are helping you, whether that's other founders that are on this journey with you, like hopefully you'll maybe talk to some of the people that are in this panel, attending this event with you. I can't overstate how much we tend to ignore that element of the human experience, and this is like a long game and it's really grueling, and you're here because you care about it. And if you want to have a long-term impact and the ability to stay in this without burning out, that concept of support and community is just, I can't overstate it.
Well, I know we're at time, but if Arvita and Nitesh want to give like a super quick last piece of advice, please do so, and then we can let folks go.
I'd say focus on two things: really understanding, being super clear on your problem, and have like a realistic distribution plan.
Thank you. And yeah, I think the only thing I would add there is just go out there, network, talk to as many people as you can, tell anyone who'd listen to you about your idea and what problem you're trying to solve. No bad answers. All you're going to get are different opinions. You can choose which ones to take, which ones to leave. You may get connections and opportunities to build on any conversation. So I would just go talk to as many people as I can whenever there's an opportunity to do so.
Thank you. And thank you all panelists for making such a great getting raised ready in health tech webinar. So thanks everyone and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks again for
Thank you.
moderating.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks all.